On this Friday night, Russian forces advanced their attack on western Ukraine. Multiple missiles near a city seen as a safe haven, and the civilians getting a crash course on combat.
If this fight happens, this will be their last fight.
Two superpowers and a united plea for peace. The high-stakes talks between the U.S. president and China's president, a key Russian ally. Young, innocent lives upended by war. The resilience of Ukraine's children. And Canada's alarming rise in hate crimes.
I was spat on by a white man.
What's stopping victims from stepping forward?
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Tracy Tong.
The Ukrainian port city of Mariupol has been left in ruins, much of it now unrecognizable. Russian forces have encircled the city, and there are reports of gun battles in the streets as residents shelter in bunkers. Even they aren't safe from Russia's bombings. President Vladimir Zelensky says more than 130 people have been rescued after an airstrike hit a theater sheltering civilians earlier this week. He says hundreds are still trapped under the rubble, including many children. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. More on the situation in Mariupol and the ongoing rescue efforts in a moment. But first, the scope of Russia's offensive is widening from the Black Sea coast to the western city of Lviv, where a Russian airstrike broke through Ukraine's defense system and hit an airport. Ukraine's capital was also the target of more Russian strikes. Kyiv Emergency Services says at least one person has been killed and several more injured. We have team coverage from on the ground in Ukraine tonight with Jeff Semple and Mercedes Stephenson. And we begin our coverage tonight in Lviv. Mercedes, the city has been a relative safe haven in Ukraine since the invasion began, but that changed today. Take us through what happened.
Tracy, at about 6 a.m., we started to hear air sirens over the city, and that's when 4 cruise missiles launched from over the Black Sea landed at the international airport here in Lviv. They struck an aircraft repair facility. They missed the runway, the control tower, as well as the terminal, and thankfully there was only one person injured in the attack. They are in moderate condition, according to Ukrainian authorities. There was 2 more cruise missiles that were shot down by air defense systems that did not manage to reach their target. But obviously, this is a significant advancement in the war west. Lviv has been, as you mentioned, a relative safe haven. And obviously, if it is now becoming a location for Russian strikes, this would be the second one in under a week, the last one having been on Sunday, and it killed more than 35 people. That is raising concerns about what it means for the relative safety of western Ukraine. And there's certainly expectations that there are likely to be more strikes against critical infrastructure in this part of the country and around Lviv. That's something that we were hearing from Ukrainian officials earlier today, that they are saying this is war and they are prepared for more strikes like this that could happen at any time.
So what is the mood like among residents there today who are now seeing the potential for escalation on their doorstep?
Well, it's a really interesting contrast because on the one hand, you have a busy European city where people are going about their lives. They're in restaurants, they're having coffee. At the same time, there is a curfew and there is real concern that there could be strikes here. There's a very large number of internally displaced people who have come here with their families who did not want to separate, with women and children and the elderly going over the border and men staying behind to fight. So this has sort of been a last stronghold here. It is a humanitarian hub where there is a lot of humanitarian assistance that is pouring in. And also, of course, we're very close to the Polish border, only about 70 kilometers away, and that is where military support has been coming in as well. Authorities here say the strike on Lviv shows that Russians are in fact targeting civilian areas, that there is not a military base in this city, but it's certainly a feeling of calmness, but at the same time the possibility of another imminent strike now that it seems like this front is opening up.
Mercedes Stephenson in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.
Now, the question of whether to stay or flee is becoming more pressing right across Ukraine. For several days, the Ukrainian government has said the port city of Odesa would soon become a target. And as Jeff Semple reports, Russian forces now appear to be closing in.
If faced with the decision to flee or fight, this group has chosen the latter. Ukrainian civilians receiving a crash course in war. Odesa, Ukraine's third largest city, is in Russia's warpath, with its forces 100 kilometers away. These lessons are offered for free by a military school since Russia's invasion in response to overwhelming demand.
There are very many people who consider protecting their homes, their country, their city.
This instructor is a retired IT consultant who took up recreational shooting as a hobby a few years ago.
Can you teach them to defend themselves against a trained Russian soldier?
It's a very difficult question. This is something that everyone should decide for himself. But I think that many of these guys understand that if this fight happens, this will be their last fight.
This married father of 2 young children is receiving the training. Fighting-aged men aren't allowed to leave Ukraine, and he says his wife refuses to leave without him.
It's hard. We are ready to fight for our families.
That fierce resistance might seem surprising from a city once considered one of Ukraine's most Moscow-friendly, a Russian-speaking population and centuries-old cultural connections. Addressing a rally, Vladimir Putin said his so-called special military operation is liberating Ukraine's Russian-speaking population from a Nazi genocide. But as he spoke, protests broke out in the Russian-speaking city of Kherson against their new Russian occupation. These claims that Russian speakers are under threat in Ukraine are complete lies and propaganda, Odesa's mayor told Global News. A remarkable rejection of Putin's narrative from a politician who's faced criticism in the past for having close ties to the Kremlin.
I think that Putin is the biggest uniter of Ukraine.
This international relations expert says Putin's aggression has turned Ukraine's Russian-speaking residents against him. In 3 weeks, the city has become blanketed in Ukrainian flags, including this one on a monument of the city's Russian founder, Catherine the Great.
It cannot last like this anymore after he invaded Ukraine, after he started to kill Ukrainian children in the Russian language cities. The big mistake is to think that Russian language somehow defines the belonging to the Russian state.
When asked whether she would be willing to leave or accept Russian rule, this Russian-speaking political expert is overcome.
It's a very painful question.
Moments like that one are so common here. We can be speaking with someone even casually on the street when they're suddenly overcome with emotion. A city on edge, its residents bracing for the fight of their lives. Tracy?
Jeff Semple in Odesa, Ukraine. Thanks, Jeff. Putin's rally at the packed Moscow soccer stadium marked the 8th anniversary of Russia's annexation of Crimea. He framed that military offensive as an act of liberation and used similar language in an attempt to justify his current war on Ukraine.
Именно избавить людей от этих страданий, от этого геноцида, является основной, главной причиной, побудительным мотивом и целью военной операции, которую мы начали на Донбассе и на Украине.
Putin vowed Russia would prevail in what he called the special operation in Ukraine. The address was carried live on state television, though programming cut away briefly. A spokesperson has since said that was an error. The southern port city of Mariupol is completely surrounded and cut off from humanitarian aid or escape. That is slowing efforts at that theater destroyed by a Russian missile on Wednesday. 130 people have been rescued, but more than 1,000 are believed to have been sheltering in the building's basement. Here's Goomansingh with Survivor Stories.
The theater basement was supposed to be a safe place. Now, potentially hundreds wait for rescue under the rubble 2 days after a Russian missile strike. Mariupol is a destroyed city, but is being bombarded relentlessly and cut off from aid. Bodies still remain in yards and on the streets.
It's a horror. What for? Tell me what for? What are we guilty of?
It's not just in the south where the attacks are shattering lives.
See, the missile hit our building. All apartments are totally destroyed. I do not know where I'm going to live now, where I'm going to work, I don't know to carry on living.
Ukraine's armed forces officials say Russians are trying to increase their presence around the capital. Missile strikes continue to be fired in and around Kyiv. Many are intercepted. Still, dozens of residential blocks have been hit. The damage almost can't be measured.
Life is getting lost. Not just the infrastructure, life is getting lost. Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kherson, Bucha. Life is destroyed and taken. Children are getting killed.
Families shared their experiences with journalists Friday. All had harrowing tales of escape and fear for those left behind.
There were those Russian tanks, and I said, if they don't let us through, we prayed God to get through. And when we reached the roadblock, their checkpoint, we were stopped and they lined us up. And we looked down because we thought, maybe if they don't like us, they will start shooting us.
So many right now across the country are weighing the risks of hiding versus fleeing. And if they get to a new, safer location in Ukraine, how long will they have before the fighting is at their heels once again? Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
The World Food Programme issued a stark warning about Ukraine's food supply chains today, saying they are falling apart, collapsing as key infrastructure is destroyed.
The country's food supply chain is falling apart. Movement of goods has slowed down due to insecurity and the reluctance of drivers to drive to places like Dnipro, let alone Mariupol.
Officials say Mariupol is running out of its last reserve of food and water, and that UN aid convoys have been unable to enter the city. U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with China's president this morning about what's happening in Ukraine. The video call came amid concerns China could be thinking of backing Russia in the conflict by providing either military or economic aid. As Heather Yourex-West reports, the U.S. is hoping to stop that at all costs.
They lead the two most powerful countries in the world, and for close to 2 hours, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping spoke via video link about one thing. The U.S. president making it crystal clear any move in support of the Russian invasion would not be tolerated.
China has to make a decision for themselves about where they want to stand and how they want the history books to look at them and view their actions.
For weeks, China has stayed on the sidelines, refusing to condemn the actions of its economic ally and Security Council partner. But after Friday's call, China's state news agency reported President Xi told the U.S. president the Ukraine crisis is something we don't want to see, adding that as the world's two largest economies, we must shoulder our due international responsibilities and make efforts for world peace.
I do think that it's an opportunity also to be a statesman for Xi Jinping, who has complained that China has been held back on the international scene.
But China could benefit from the conflict as well, particularly if NATO members and their resources are distracted from Chinese activities in the Indo-Pacific. A Chinese aircraft carrier sailed through the sensitive Taiwan Strait just hours before the leaders met.
China will have to do the cost and benefit analysis very carefully. If its association with this military adventure by Kremlin is much, on the cost is much greater than the benefit of this association, that China would really have to think twice.
President Biden will next join NATO country leaders for that special summit in Brussels, where Poland's prime minister is expected to seek support for a peacekeeping mission into Ukraine, one that would see armed NATO soldiers deployed into the country in order to accompany humanitarian aid. Tracy?
Heather Yourex-West reporting in Washington. Thank you. The rising number of racist attacks in Canada. Coming up, what victims of hate are being urged to do. China's government plans to stick with its zero COVID strategy as the country deals with its largest outbreak since the pandemic began. That means lockdowns for tens of millions of people, along with multiple rounds of testing. Travelers arriving from overseas will still need to quarantine for up to 3 weeks. The country has seen 15,000 new cases this month. China's official COVID-19 death toll is about 4,600, the vast majority during the initial outbreak in early 2020. Statistics Canada has released alarming numbers showing a surge of hate in this country. The government agency says police reported hate crimes increased by 37% during the first year of the pandemic, and those targeting East or Southeast Asian people went up a staggering 301%. And as Dan Spector reports, these incidents are escalating at a time when overall crime rates are trending downward. And a warning, some of the content in this story is disturbing.
I was spat on by a white man walking toward me who also made some racial and sexual comments.
Vancouver's Trixie Ling says she was assaulted in May of 2020 because she is an Asian woman.
We become the model minority, but yet we have this illusion of belonging. But really, at the end, we are still very othered.
According to new data released by Statistics Canada, the number of hate crimes reported to police in this country increased sharply in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, to the most ever recorded. Hate crimes against Black Canadians nearly doubled, while those against East and Southeast Asian Canadians quadrupled. And that only counts cases where victims came forward.
I think that the pandemic has exacerbated the whole phenomenon.
Last year in Montreal, this man made a threatening gesture at an Asian woman. He was later arrested. This person was caught on video verbally abusing an Asian man at a Quebec grocery store earlier this year.
Because of you Chinese people.
Not surprising. Hate crimes have been on the rise for years.
This as overall crime rates went down 10%. It is a national issue. Almost all provinces saw hate crime numbers rise. Stats Canada says the biggest increases were in Nova Scotia, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. 84% of reported hate crimes take place in cities.
The actual rate of hate crimes in Canada is far higher, but the vast majority of them don't get reported to police.
Lack of trust in police and community language barriers are just a few of the reasons more people don't come forward. Trixie Ling did report her incident to police. No arrests were made, but she wants to encourage others to speak up.
The anti-Asian hate continues because systemic racism continues. So that's why it's important for us to continue speaking out.
A spokesperson for the public safety minister called the spike in reported hate crimes alarming and said a new national action plan for combating hate is in the works. It will include de-radicalization strategies and new tools and training for police. Dan Spector, Global News, Ottawa.
Cosmic close call. Ahead, the asteroid that caught Earth off guard.
You're watching Global National.
An unusual sight in Venice. The historic canals that wind through Italy's lagoon city were almost empty yesterday. An extreme low tide left gondolas and small boats beached. Venice is known for its delicate balance between low and high tides, but factors including climate change and rising sea levels have made the fluctuations more drastic than ever before. High ocean temperatures are putting Australia's Great Barrier Reef in peril once again. The reef is suffering from severe coral bleaching, according to a new report from the Marine Authority that manages its ecosystem. UNESCO is also set to consider downgrading the reef's World Heritage Site status because of the damage it has suffered from human-caused climate change. Another bleaching event in 2020 left 2/3 of the reef's coral damaged. And there are no reports of damage after an asteroid was spotted speeding towards Earth last week with very little warning. The asteroid, named 2022 EB5, was first detected just 2 hours before it entered Earth's atmosphere on March 11th. An astronomer in Hungary raised the alarm. The Near-Earth Objects Coordination Center later calculated its orbit, showing it had a 100% chance of impact. The asteroid wasn't detected sooner because of its small size, only around 2 meters long, about as big as a fridge, and because it was moving so fast, at almost 18 kilometers a second. Experts believe the asteroid burned up somewhere over western Greenland and the coast of Norway. Children in war. Next, the sadness and resilience of young Ukrainians caught up in the conflict. It is hard to ignore the suffering of the people of Ukraine, but imagine seeing the horrors and hardships of war through the eyes of children, forced to flee their homes and everything they've ever known. Yet the resilience of some of the youngest Ukrainians affected by brutal conflict is not only inspiring, it's raising hope. Mike Drolet has some of their stories.
There's no fear in the eyes of Valeria, the 5-year-old Ukrainian who, until recently, had known only joy in her life, with dreams as big as the 45-meter photo of her unfurled this week in Lviv, supported literally by dozens of Ukrainians. Her picture has now become a symbol for her country's resilience. Of course, we know now how so many dreams are being shattered, and yet within the nightmare that's unfolding, the strength of the child refugees has been as heartwarming as it is tragic. The teachers at this German school were devastated to see how so many kids were in need of help, yet the families arriving were so thankful, so kind, it raised their spirits. This school director says once he saw the children in the playground, he realized that's exactly what they needed. So they let them play. Classes could wait. Fortunately, it takes a lot to extinguish the innocence in a child. But that doesn't make it any easier for mothers like Olena, who escaped to Poland. Her young son wants to return home, but not before Olena gets rid of the monsters waiting there. If only it were that easy. Eventually the truth will find them. How can it not? The weight of the war should be on the adults, not kids like the one this senior citizen in Moldova has agreed to shelter. As Maria says, we're all human beings, and no one reminds us of that, like the littlest ones. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Tracy Tong. As resilient as children can be, sadly, too many won't make it through this war. We leave you tonight with this heartbreaking and powerful memorial. 109 empty baby strollers were put on display in Lviv today, each one representing a child killed in Ukraine. Now, that number is only according to what Ukrainian officials can confirm so far. The real death toll is likely far higher. Thank you for being with us. Take care.